Welcome to Around the Weird. Here's your host, the museum curator of the strange and unusual, Mr. Nothing.
Thank you, mysterious voice, and welcome back to Around the Weird, a booktube channel where I talk about all the unusual and out of the ordinary literature that I've found in my travels. Today, I want to talk about a short story because it is Short Story Tuesday, and because we are nearing the month of October, I wanted to make a jump start on the Spooktober reads. Already been reading some scary stories, as you might have seen, and now I want to talk about a pretty good scary story or spooky themed story from an author that I've talked about before. It is a story that is about wine and revenge. I am referring to The Cask of Amontillado by Edgar Allan Poe, which was published in 1846. I've talked about Poe before, so I don't need to go into that great of detail. Just know that he is an American author known for writing at least one book, short stories and poems. And he's acclaimed for his work now, but in his own time, he was not very successful, which is a bit unfortunate. His stories are filled with sort of Gothic atmospheres and guilt and whatnot, as we've seen in the many short stories and poems that I've talked about on this channel before. Be sure to check out the short story videos if you want more detail about that, including The Crucible, The Telltale Heart, and the narrative of Arthur Gordon Pym of Nantucket, which is a very weird story, but it is a very interesting one as well. So without further ado, let's talk about The Cask of Amontillado. I will read it, or not read it, but I'll do a summary, a little bit of analysis, and we will move on from there. So The Cask of Amontillado focuses on the character of Montressor. He seems to be an Italian nobleman, and at the start of the story, we learn that he is vowing revenge against Fortunato, a man who apparently did him wrong, maybe another nobleman, and for this is all for reasons we quite aren't so clear about. We're just told by Montressor that he is vowing revenge for whatever Fortunato did to him. And it's also carnival season in Italy, so everything's very festive, and Fortunato seems to be in the mood to get his drink on, so Montressor begins his revenge by inviting Fortunato to test a new shipment of wine that he got of Amontillado. He says he wants to invite another friend, but Fortunato says that friend is an idiot, and Montressor says he's playing into the Italian urge to try wine and whatnot. So Amontillado follows him, and they walk underneath his mansion, underneath his home. And they go through various vaults of what appears to be the winery and the catacombs as well. That's under his estate, filled with bones and spiders and bricks, which we're going to find out what those bricks are for in a few moments. But he's also getting Fortunato drunk, making sure that Fortunato is too drunk to really know what's going to happen next. And at that point, Montressor chains up Fortunato, which at first he thinks is a joke, but then he slowly starts shouting and screaming. And Montressor teases him by also shouting and screaming to highlight that no one can hear him, that this is most likely going to be the place where Fortunato dies. And then he begins bricking Fortunato into the catacombs with his masonry kit that he had stored away for this very moment. Fortunato thinks again. He at first thinks this is a joke, and he begs Montressor to reconsider and just go their separate ways. But Montressor refuses to hear it. After he bricks him into this sort of cellar, this catacomb, he does feel a sense of minor guilt, especially because he can no longer hear Fortunato from behind that wall. But it quickly goes away, and as the story comes to a close, he notes that he's been living a good life all these years, and no one has ever found Fortunato's body, and that's where the story ends there. In terms of analysis, this is quite a dark short story. It's also one that I feel like a lot of people are familiar with, or just the general idea of like bricking your enemy into a wall because of a perceived wrong or something like that. It's certainly one that I've known about for quite some time. It's sort of seeps into the culture. So even if I haven't read it, I definitely know about what this is. It's the case with a lot of Poe short stories, and that he's tapping into something so like familiar that we're all just instantly understanding of what he's trying to say here. One of the themes that Poe is working with is that of revenge. Montressor is mad about a perceived wrong that has been done toward him by Fortunato. We're never told what that wrong is, only that it's great enough to want to kill your enemy. But I feel like Poe is trying to highlight at that point the sort of like illogical nature of revenge at times, where like no thing that Fortunato did to Montressor, unless it was like killing a family member, would have been great enough to necessitate this type of reaction, this type of action on the part of Montressor. But here he is doing it. Allow me to read you an interesting quote from this. "The 1,000 injuries of Fortunato I had borne as best I could, but when he ventured upon insult I vowed revenge. You who so well know the nature of my soul will not suppose, however, that I gave utterance to a threat. At length I would be avenged. This was a point definitively settled, but the very definitiveness with which it was resolved precluded the idea of risk. I must not only punish, but punish with impunity. A wrong is unredressed when retribution overtakes its redresser. It is equally unredressed when the avenger fails to make himself felt as such to him who has done the wrong." And rather than really have a reason for the revenge, like it seems like the narrator has a mindset that any wrong, no matter how small, has to be addressed, or else people will think that you're weak, which is certainly a criminal mindset to have. Like if I don't do something, the other criminals will think I'm weak and they'll act against me. But Montressor isn't a criminal here. He's just a very, very angry man about whatever Fortunato has done. And what's interesting is Fortunato seems ignorant to the whole thing. This slight was so small and seemingly insignificant that Fortunato isn't even aware that he may have done it. Or like there's no apparent blood feud between Fortunato and the Montressor. So it's a feud, or it's a one-sided feud, which is very interesting in how Poe chooses to show this sort of petty grievance that Montressor has. It reminds me a little bit of Othello, which I read recently, in that Othello isn't aware of his lieutenant's sort of grievance, that he wanted to be promoted and he wasn't, and so it's sort of a one-sided feud. But it ends with Othello dying, and like it ends with Iago killing Othello, or getting Othello killed, and Othello losing his entire life in the process. And I think that's important, because sometimes you might have that case where something is done against a person. Rather than talk about it, that person will just hold it within them until they decide to unleash it in a way where the other person might not have been aware that there was even a wrong done in the first place. And what's also interesting is they mention a family motto in this story called "Nemo me impune incessit," which is Latin for no wrong done against me, or like no will not be avenged in impunity, or something like that. Basically saying, if you do something wrong, I will strike back. Now here that's happening, and again, like what causes that need for revenge? Is it something significant, or is it something tiny? Is any act against a person seen as in need of revenge. And you can see how, even the smallest slight, like, does it demand that someone be bricked into a wall and killed? I don't necessarily think so. So Poe is kind of showing how irrational revenge can be at times here. There's also something to be said about the Gothic atmosphere, which you see in so many different Poe stories. You have death, you have the catacombs, the characters are traveling underneath the mansion through the city of the dead, which is definitely definitely spooky. And then you also have the idea of vengeance and characters and basically a blood feud against one another, or one character in a blood feud. So very spooky Gothic atmosphere, which Poe really excels at in pretty much any story that he writes. There's also something to be said about guilt in this story. So, contrary to other Poe stories, Montressor feels almost no guilt about what he's done. In The Black Cat, you could argue that the cat's meow at the end of the story, or screeching, is a sign of the narrator's guilt. And The Telltale Heart, it's all about guilt right there. A character murders someone else and then feels extremely guilt about it. But Montressor feels no guilt at the end of this story. He feels a minor pang, like he did something wrong, but he quickly forgets about it and moves on with his life, apparently. And as he notes, nobody was aware of the body in the catacombs. Nobody knew what happened to Fortunato. He gets away with it. So I think that's significant compared to other Poe stories, in that, Montressor is never caught for his actions. So that Christian sort of idea of the guilty getting punished for their actions, Poe seemingly moves away from that in this story, which I think is very interesting, and we have to note that in comparison with the other stories that he's written. Anyway, those are my thoughts on The Cask of Amontillado by Edgar Allan Poe. I 100% recommend that you go check this out. It's a great short story. There's a reason that it has pervaded or infiltrated pop culture so well. Definitely a lot of interesting ideas about revenge, and just the atmosphere is really well written as well. So I'll put a link to it in the description. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Let's have a discussion about this. Otherwise, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so that other people can find out about Edgar Allan Poe if they don't already know, and this short story as well. And don't forget to join the Discord if you're interested in learning more about Edgar Allan Poe, or talking about it, or talking about movies or whatnot if you want. And until then, I wish you the best of luck in your weird and wine-based travels. Farewell.